As citizens, we have to co-create good governance. We cannot outsource it and hope to be passively happy consumers. Like everything worth its while, good governance must be earned. Good evening and welcome to International News Desk on Equa Television International. My name is Lois Chiraki, bringing you the top stories that are short. On tonight's news, emergency meeting over Gaza's fight held by United Nations Security Council. Petro, Colombia's new president, suggests ambitious tax reforms. No less than 7 dead as South Korea's Seoul deluged by record rain. From Kazakhstan base, Russia fires Iranian satellite into space. And Taiwan holds live fire exercise as China ranges war crimes. The United Nations Security Council has held an emergency meeting to deliberate the condition in Gaza, with numerous members raising alarms amidst a delicate ceasefire between Israel and Islamic Jihad, a Palestinian armed group, after 3 days of Israeli air raids on the territory. United Nations Middle East envoy Tor Wennesland, speaking via video at the start of the meeting, warned the ceasefire is fragile. Any recommencement of conflicts will only have devastating consequences for Palestinians and Israelis and make any political development on significant issues elusive. The Council was deeply concerned by this turn of events, which could lead to the continuation of a fully fledged military confrontation and a further worsening of the already dire humanitarian situation in Gaza, Russian Ambassador Vasily Nebenzia stressed. According to Gaza's health ministry, no less than 44 Palestinians, almost half of them civilians, including 15 children, were killed after Israel started a series of bombardments of Islamic Jihad positions in Gaza on Friday. Hundreds of people in the territory were injured. The armed group fired thousands of rockets in response, but most were stopped or blown up. Israeli emergency services said 3 people were injured by shrapnel and 31 others slightly hurt. On Sunday night, the Egyptian brokered ceasefire came into force, but both sides have reserved the right to respond if the ceasefire is breached. Linda Thomas-Greenfield, United States ambassador to the United Nations, leaves the room at the end of the Security Council meeting on the situation in Middle East and Palestine. Wennesland said that the United Nations assessment of the violence was ongoing, noting that some 20% of nearly 1,100 rockets were fired by armed Palestinian groups falling within the Gaza Strip. The fighting was the worst in Gaza since last year's 11-day war that killed at least 250 people. Ahead of the meeting, Israeli ambassador to the United Nations, Gilad Erdan, called for the Council to place full accountability on Islamic Jihad. Palestinian ambassador Riyad Mansour condemned Israel's unjustified aggression. The Security Council's consultations took place at the United Nations headquarters in New York. No statement is anticipated after the closed-door meeting, which will follow the open debate, more than a few diplomatic sources said, according to reports. On elections, Colombian President Gustavo Petros, on his first day in office, presented a new tax reform proposal to Congress that is anticipated to finance the ambitious programs and policies he hopes will transform the country. On Monday, the step by the country's first leftist leader was the first move to fulfilling his promise to millions of Colombians, like Marlene Salcedo, a 47-year-old social leader from the Putumayo province, who watched the inauguration Sunday with high expectations for Colombia's new left-wing president. Just like several in Petros' base, Salcedo has a lot riding on Petros' success. Her home in Putumayo in southwest Colombia on the border with Ecuador and Peru is damaged with armed groups that threatened her in July after she joined Petros' transition team. Salcedo who advises the administration on drug policy, believes Petros can bring the much-awaited peace expected from a 2016 treaty between the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia, FARC, and the government. Petros had promised a deep transformation of Colombia on the campaign trail, a country that historically has been run by a small group of elites and troubled with political violence, uprooting government policies that have kept indigenous people, Afro-Colombians, poor farmers and women from equal income. Land access and development was central to his platform. Since the election, the president has appointed cabinet ministers that have shown he is committed to that mission and has reconcile with political adversaries, steps that have enhanced his overall popularity. His supporters now have hope that political will and high favorability will prove enough to overcome the various challenges ahead. He has spelled out a vision of a more inclusive society for one of the most unequal countries in the world. He has assured the full implementation of the peace deal, the removal of police from military control, the reopening of relations with Venezuela, a renewal to negotiations with armed groups, major social programs such as new subsidies for single mothers and free college tuition, and a move away from oil, a top export. Addressing inequality is a top concern for Colombians who were badly hit by pandemic closures. Around 40% of the population, some 20 million people, now live in poverty as a result. The war in Ukraine and its disruption of supply chains has only worsened the cost of living in Colombia. On top of rising inflation and food prices, security conditions, especially in rural areas where the conflict has historically concentrated, have deteriorated for civilians as illegal armed groups thrived and cocaine production augmented. On weather, almost 7 people have died and 6 missing in and around Seoul, the South Korean capital, after torrential rain knocked out power, stoked landslides and flooded homes and the city's metro system. According to Korea Meteorological Administration, KMA, on Monday, the southern part of Seoul was deluged in over 100 millimeters, 3.9 inches of the rain in an hour late, with the rain in some parts of the city reaching 141.5 millimeters, 5.7 inches an hour. Reports said the downpour was the heaviest in 80 years. Not more than 5 people died, while 2 were killed in nearby Gyeonggi province by early Tuesday, the Central Disaster and Safety Countermeasures Headquarters said. According to more reports, 3 included a teenager and a family were trapped in their basement home on Monday evening and later found dead. Disaster officials said a 4th person also died in Seoul after being trapped in a flooded building, while another was believed to have been electrocuted as he tried to clear a fallen tree from the roadside. President Yoon Suk-yeol ordered government officials to evacuate residents from high-risk areas and encourage business these flexible commuting hours on Tuesday morning. On Tuesday, the Interior Ministry raised its flood watch level to serious, while the Korea Forest Service issued landslide advisories in 46 cities and counties across the country, including in 9 districts in Seoul, according to reports. In Tehran, Iran, a high-resolution Iranian-owned satellite has been fired into space from a base in Kazakhstan, which Iran has said it wants to use for non-military purposes, was successfully launched on Tuesday, according to reports. Earlier this month, more reports said Western intelligence officials claimed that Russia planned to use the satellite for months or longer to assist its war efforts in Ukraine. The claim has been rejected by the Iranian space agency ISA, which said last week it will have inclusive control over the satellite from day one, and Russia's Roscosmos. ISA said orders transmitted to the satellite and data received from it will be encrypted and controlled by a team of Iranian engineers and scientists in Iran, and no other country has access to the information throughout this process. According to the reports, Iran has the ability to build remote sensing satellites with an image resolution of 5 to 10 meters, that's 16.4 to 32.8 feet, and can inject up to 50 kg, 110 pounds packages into an orbit of 500 kilometers, 311 miles. But the Khayyam, named after 11th century Persian polymath Omar Khayyam, which was commissioned by Iran and built by Russia, can hit a much more accurate resolution of 1 meter, 3.3 feet, and is to operate at 500 kilometer orbit while weighing about 600 kg, that's 1,322 pounds. Iran has also stressed that the country's military space program is separate, with the ISA saying the country's defense forces will pursue their own exclusive paths technically and strategically to account for their own needs. Taiwan's military has held live-fire artillery exercises faking a defense of the island as China continued the air and naval drills it had launched in protest against U.S. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's visit to the self-ruled territory. Taiwanese officials say Tuesday's drills, which involved Seoul Theater Command, announced that it was continuing its exercises in the seas and airspace around Taiwan. According to reports, it was also reported that about 20 Chinese and Taiwanese Navy boats were locked in a standoff in the Taiwan Strait, with some of the Chinese boats attempting to press into the waterway's median line, the de facto sea border between China and Taiwan. China claims democratically governed Taiwan, an island of 23 million people, as its own, and has called Pelosi's visit there last week a violation of its sovereignty and a provocation by the United States. The joint air and sea exercises it launched in response have been its major in the Taiwan Strait and involved test fires of ballistic missiles over Taipei for the first time. They took place in 6 zones around the island and were scheduled to run for 4 days and end on Sunday. A Navy Force helicopter under the Eastern Theater Command of China's People's Liberation Army (PLA) takes part in military drills in the waters around Taiwan at an undisclosed location on August 8, 2022. On Monday, China's Eastern Theater Command announced that it will extend the drills, focusing on anti-submarine and sea assault operations. It said maritime patrol aircraft, fighter jets, helicopters and a destroyer practice locating and attacking targets, including submarines, in the waters of Taiwan. Treatment concentrated on joint blockades and resupply logistics. It did not say when the raging exercises will end. In the Taiwanese capital, Taipei, Foreign Minister Joseph Wu accused China of using Pelosi's visit as an excuse to prepare for an invasion of the island. More stories. Key test of first possible Lyme vaccine in 20 years commences. Researchers are looking for thousands of volunteers in the United States and Europe to partake in a test of the first potential vaccine against Lyme disease in 20 years in hopes of better fighting the tick-borne threat. Lyme disease is a growing problem, with cases rising and warming weather helping ticks expand their habitat. While a vaccine for dogs has long been available, the only Lyme vaccine for humans was removed from the U.S. market in 2002 due to lack of demand, leaving people to rely on bug spray and physically checking for the presence of ticks. Pfizer and French biotech firm Valneva are targeting to evade both adults and kids as young as 5 from the most common Lyme strains on 2 continents. Robert Tarwilla, an avid hunter and hiker, was first in line on Friday when the study opened in central Pennsylvania. He's seen lots of friends get Lyme disease and is tired of wondering if his next tick bite will make him sick. Precisely how often Lyme for Lyme in the US each year. Pfizer's Anderson put Europe's yearly infections at about 130,000. Black-leg ticks, also called deer ticks, carry Lyme-causing bacteria. The infection initially causes fatigue, fever, and joint pain. Often, but not always, the first sign is a red round balls eye rash. Antibiotic treatment is vital, but it can be difficult for people to tell if they were bitten by ticks, as some are as small as pin. Untreated Lyme can cause severe arthritis and damage the heart and nervous system. Some people have lasting symptoms even after treatment. Dr. Gary Womsar, a Lyme expert at New York Medical College, who is not involved with the new research, said most vaccines against diseases work after people are exposed to a germ. The Lyme vaccine offers a different plan by working a step earlier to stop a tick bite from transmitting the infection. In Africa, mixed reactions over Qatar peace talk deal in Chad. The outcome of the deal signed in Qatar to launch peace talks in N'Djamena has caused mixed reactions between Chadians back home, while some Chadians accepted the new agreement between the country's military government and over 40 opposition groups. Others trust the problem is far from being settled after the major rebel group refused to take part. Whatever the outcome the negotiators in Doha reached, this long-awaited peace agreement is to be welcomed. We have been waiting for this agreement for 5 months to allow the political military leadership end to come and participate in the talks here in N'Djamena, said Jacob Francois, USPR party leader. 9 rebel groups have rejected the deal, saying the negotiators had not paid attention to its demand, including the release of prisoners. Rejection by FARC and at least 8 other rebel factions cast a wall over celebrations of the agreement, which was hammered out after months of talks in Qatar's capital. This agreement we now have with those who have signed this agreement still poses a problem with its application inland, because the important civil society organizations and the most important political actors inland do not adhere to the process, according to Max Kemkeyo, UDP party leader. Chad has endured repeated uprisings and unrest since independence in 1960. The discussion targets to settle on the rules for a presidential election by Deby has promised by October. Again, on elections in Kenya, polls open in fiercely contested election race. The D-Day is here in Kenya. Hundreds lined up to vote in a high-stakes election Tuesday. 22.1 million registered voters should elect their president, senators, governors, lawmakers, women, representatives, and some 1,500 county officials. Before 3 a.m. Greenwich Meridian time, the official opening hour for polls, citizens queued to take part in the general elections taking place against a milieu of soaring prices for food and fuel, a death that has left millions hungry and deep dissatisfaction with the political elite, especially among the youth. It is accompanied by his wife, Rachel Ruto, that the Deputy President William Ruto cast his ballot in primary school in Gishu, Western Kenya. The 55-year-old is considered one of the main contenders of the presidential race. Another top candidate is Raila Odinga, who has vied for the presidency for a quarter century. Lawyers David Murray and George Wajakoya are also running. Uhuru Kenyatta, outgoing president, the son of Kenya's first president, cut across the usual ethnic lines and angered Ruto by backing longtime rival Odinga after their bitter 2017 election contest. Kenyatta, who was also seen voting, says he's hopeful for a peaceful transition of power. In recent days, opinion polls suggest that Raila narrowly edged past Ruto. However, there's everything left to play for. If neither of the top candidates wins over 50%, Kenya will have to hold a runoff for the first time in its history. Official results must be announced within a week of the election. Independent Electoral and Boundaries Commission is under pressure to ensure a peaceful vote. Security is tight, with over 150,000 officers being deployed. Still on elections, Marape as Prime Minister returned by Papua New Guinea's new parliament. Following elections in the South Pacific island nation, Papua New Guinea's parliament has returned Prime Minister James Marape to power. On Tuesday, Marape was sworn in as Prime Minister for a second time after legislators in the new parliament returned him unopposed to the position, according to reports and election authorities. Voting in Papua New Guinea's general election began on July 4th and ended on July 22nd, but vote counting was prolonged until Monday because of special circumstances, including security issues, attacks on ballot boxes, and logistical challenges, the Electoral Commission said. The leading candidates to lead the new government had been Marape and his predecessor Peter O'Neill, who resigned in 2019. The election in the Pacific nation is amongst the world's most challenging due to difficult terrain, extreme weather, poor transport infrastructure, linguistic and cultural diversity. The national poll was also plagued by violence, delays, fraud allegations, and large numbers of voters missing from the electoral roll, international election observers said. The deadline for Parliament to seat 105 out of 118 seats had been declared on Tuesday. 2 women were among those elected. Marape, the leader of the Pangu party that clinched 36 seats, won 97 votes on the floor of parliament to become prime minister and will form a coalition government with over a dozen minor parties and independents. The prime minister, who first came to power in 2019, said the coalition had had a collective dictate and called for the nation to unite. According to reports, roughly 50 election-related deaths this year, down from 204 deaths documented in the 2017 vote. He apologized last month to thousands of people who have been turned away from polling stations because of problems with the electoral roll. Gaining independence from Australia in 1975, Papua New Guinea is a diverse tribal society of 9 million people who are mostly subsistence farmers and speak over 800 languages. Finally, more capacities to sustain peace needed in Africa to successfully fight extremism and terrorism. On Monday, addressing a Security Council open debate on peace in Africa, an African Union commissioner called for transformed efforts to sustain security gains amidst rising violence. Civil societies and non-governmental organizations, NGOs, frequently sound the alarm over intensifying violence in Africa. Each month sees its share of raids by terror groups or Islamist insurgents as armed conflicts continue to destroy thousands of lives. In June, the Armed Conflict Location and Event Data Project, ACLAD, a non-governmental organization, found that more civilians had been killed in Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso since the beginning of 2022 than the death toll recorded for the whole of 2021. The African Union Commissioner for Political Affairs, Peace and Security on Monday alerted that the threat of violent extremism and terrorism continued to emerge heavily over the continent and the world at large. Bankole Adeoye pleaded for renewed efforts to promote peace as he addressed a Security Council open debate. We have witnessed popular uprisings with some metamorphosizing into what is beginning to look like intractable efforts. The Nigerian diplomat said all conflicts are assuming new dimensions, foiled and sustained by new insecurity threat. Against this global and continental context, we must redouble our efforts at developing our capacities to sustain peace. Adeoye said the African Union Commission was willing to continue its implementation of the African Union Agenda 2063 and the United Nations 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, which will enable the continent to build capacities to sustain peace. To refresh our memories, emergency meeting over Gaza's fight held by United Nations Security Council. Colombia's new president suggests ambitious tax reforms. No less than 7 dead as South Korea's Seoul deluged by record rain. From Kazakhstan base, Russia fires Iranian satellite into space. Taiwan holds live fire exercise as China ranges war games. That's all for today. We will be back with some more news updates. Until then, stay tuned. I'm Lois Duraki. Have a good evening.